Hey, good afternoon. Oy, bago yan. Good afternoon, and welcome to Matt Montoya Live special episode po. Nagtataka po kayo, I'm sure for those who are watching us on the Lost Channel and other our partner networks na medyo maaga po ang program natin today. Normally, we have our program on Tuesdays and Thursdays at 8 p.m. But today, dahil po may special episode po tayo, we're gonna do this early because this is about a very important topic that we have, which is of course the ongoing ngayon po yung COP26 or the UN Climate Change Conference. Before we start the program, baka nagtatako po kayo bakit yung ganito ng topic natin today and bakit po tayo nagkaroon ng special episode. Alam niyo po, climate change is vital to our survival as a race, as the human race, no? So, habang ginagawa natin itong programa natin ngayon, ang mga world leaders po ay nandyan po sa Glasgow in the United Kingdom, kung saan po nag-meeting sila to discuss what's going to happen in the next few years, kung ano na po ang nangyari tungkol sa climate change po, kung ano na mga nagbabago at pwedeng gawin ng mundo tungkol sa topic na to. At bakit po ninyo kailangan malaman to? Because this affects all of us, especially here in the Philippines, na kung saan po marami pong sakuna. Alam po natin yan, no? At tayo po ay taon-taong tinatamaan ng pandemya, not pandemya, but rather ng bagyo. At nagkakaroon pa nga po ng ibang effects tulad ng earthquake, etc. So this is very important for us. This topic I would like to discuss today. Bakit po mas maaga? Kasi po nangyayari, ongoing po, mamaya pong gabi, papanoorin ko po ulit yung mga pangyayari na yan as they develop. And on Thursday, as we return to our regular time slot of 8 p.m., itutuloy po natin ang discussion. For now, special episode po muna tayo. Wala po tayong ayuda na bibigay at this hour. Gagawin po natin yun on Thursday. So, remind ko lang po kayo lahat, okay? Bago tayo mag-umpisa natin programa. And so, this will all be a special episode and we will discuss itong ang United Nations Climate Change Conference or COP26. Mamaya po, i-introduce ko po sa inyo kung ano yan. So, let's start with the program right now. This program is brought to you by Sosmar Joseph Marikina Heights Branch. Masarap kahit walang manok. Okay, we're back. And okay, so again, special episode po ito. If you're watching this live, thank you so much. But of course, this will be recorded at mamaya pong gabi, mapapanood nyo po yan sa mga regular po sumusubaybay sa ating programang Matt Montoya Live, which is normally on at 8 o'clock in the evening every Tuesday and Thursday. Ngayon lang pong araw, meron po tayong special episode to discuss itong ang COP26. So what is COP26? Alam niyo po, very important ang climate change sa ating buhay, no? Ito nga, this 2021 celebrates basically the 26th time na mag-meeting ang mga world leaders tungkol sa climate change, no? Napaka-importante po nito because ito yung framework ng ginagawa ng United Nations na kung saan yung pinirmahan ito ng Paris Agreement several years ago, na kung saan ang mundo, dinidiscuss po nila kung ano ang gagawin para ma-improve ang ating climate change or yung ating mundo. Alam niyo po, the world is dying, Mother Earth is dying, and this is our fault as a human race, na kung saan kung bakit nangyayari lahat ito. So itong climate change conference medyo napabayaan or nakalimutan na dahil po sa pandemya, because naging priority po which understandable naman dahil priority syempre yung pandemic. But of course, this affects all of us. Why? Alam niyo po yung mga face mask, mga face shield, at mga iba-iba pong mga ginagamit natin laban po sa COVID-19 umaabot po yan sa mga tubig na, sa mga ating karagatan, sa mga ilog, etc. And that, of course, dumadami yung basura sa mundo. Lahat po yan because of climate change. And why is that happening? Because of, well, as humans, no? Tayo pong mga tao sa mundo ang may kagagawan din ito. So what I will be doing today in this short episode is introduce to you why it is important for us Filipinos to understand more about climate change and what is COP26 specifically. So manood mo tayo ng mga videos at para maintindihan din po ang importansya ng climate change and mismong COP26 conference. So let's start with this video from the Financial Times na kung saan po dinidiscuss nila yung what is COP26 and why is it important to all of us.
The COP26 conference in Glasgow this November is going to be the most important climate summit in years. But what actually is a COP? And why does this one matter so much? Here's what you need to know. COP stands for Conference of the Parties. It's an opportunity for negotiators from nearly 200 countries to come together, review their progress on climate change, and decide on the best way to move forward. The ultimate goal is to emerge at the end of the 2-week conference with a text or a set of texts outlining what happens next. But it hasn't always worked out that way.
Mr. President, our future is not for sale.
L9 asked Africa to sign a suicide pact.
These summits have taken place since 1995, and while they have gotten bigger over the years with climate NGOs, governments, and activists using the COP as a platform for campaigns and media attention, meanwhile, the government negotiators often work through the night and into overtime, struggling to reach consensus. Probably the biggest success story came in 2015, when COP members agreed to the Paris Climate Accord. This aims to limit global warming to well below 2 degrees centigrade compared to pre-industrial levels, and ideally to 1.5 degrees. But to reach that target, countries will have to set new climate commitments ahead of this year's COP and really put the Paris Accord into action. For years, scientists have said the best weapon against rising temperatures is to cut greenhouse gas emissions. And working toward legally binding emissions reductions has been a priority of COP meetings since the mid-90s.
We agree on our common goal: cut global emissions by 45% by 2030 from 2010 levels, and achieve net zero emissions by 2050.
But current climate pledges aren't anywhere close to achieving this. In fact, they're moving in the opposite direction. A recent UN report estimated that by 2030, greenhouse gas emissions are likely to be 16% higher than they were in 2010. That puts the world on track for almost 3 degrees of global warming by the end of the century. This would dramatically change climatic conditions on the planet, making extreme weather events more common and potentially pushing the Earth past tipping points that would speed up warming even further.
Wow.
If we continue on our current path, we will face the collapse of everything that gives us our security.
To avoid that scenario and keep 1.5 degrees of warming within reach, those who sign the Paris Accord are supposed to update and strengthen their emissions targets, or nationally determined contributions in a bit of COP jargon, every 5 years. And this COP is the first official deadline for countries to do that since Paris.
And I wonder kung anong ginawa ng Pilipinas tungkol dyan.
Coal is the most polluting form of power. It accounts for about 45% of energy-related CO2 emissions. And at COP26, it has definitely got a target on its back.
If we are serious about 1.5 degrees, Glasgow must be the COP that consigns coal power to history.
Recently, China and G7 countries all agreed to stop funding coal-fired power stations overseas. But domestic coal use still continues. According to the International Energy Agency, the level of coal production forecast for 2050 is about 4 times the limit needed to reach net zero emissions by the middle of the century. And before everyone is willing to give up coal entirely, another issue will have to be resolved first. Money.
Yan ang pinakamahirap na tanong ko. Siyempre, all climate change.
Decarbonizing the world's economy by the middle of this century is going to cost trillions of dollars.
Yes,
and the
trillions.
question of who should pay for it has been a big sticking point for climate talks since even before the Paris Agreement.
The major emitters in the industrial countries must take the major responsibility for the past and the major responsibility as we go forward.
In 2009, rich countries promised to contribute $100 billion each year by 2020 to help developing nations cut their emissions and manage the impact of rising seas, failing crops, and other climate-related disasters. But according to the latest figures from the OECD, rich nations provided less than $80 billion of climate finance in 2019. And even though developing countries say they need the money if they are going to reach their climate goals, the $100 billion target may not be met before Glasgow gets underway. All the tools needed to curb global temperature rise are on the table at COP26, from the phasing out of coal to meeting climate finance and setting new emissions targets. In fact, more countries have net zero emissions targets now than ever before, covering nearly 2/3 of the global economy. But those targets have to be backed up by policies if they are going to turn into action. That's why the stakes are so high at COP26 and why all eyes will be on Glasgow this November.
Yan. So, ayan po it's a little bit of introduction kung ano yung COP26. It affects all of us. This is climate change every year. Subjected po tayo sa mga bagyo. Subjected po tayo sa mga natural calamities. Marami pong mga ating kababayan na namamatay. And obviously, the world is not doing anything. Hindi po natin iniisip kung bakit tayo importante. Importante po to because it is happening right now in our lifetime. Dati yung mga scientists sabi nila, mga 100 years pa, 200 years, or how many hundreds of years. It's happening now. It's not happening in 100 years. It's happening now. So itong si isang napaka-vocal na isang naturalist, is Sir David Attenborough, ang nagbigay ng opening speech diyan sa COP26 na yan. So pakinggan po natin siya and kung ano ang mensahe niya sa mga world leaders na ngayon na nagmi-meeting tungkol sa climate change. Pakinggan po natin.
As you spend the next 2 weeks debating, negotiating, persuading, and compromising, as you surely must, it's easy to forget that ultimately the emergency climate comes down to a single number.
Yan.
The concentration of carbon in our atmosphere. The measure that greatly determines global temperature. And the changes in that one number is the clearest way to chart our own story, for it defines our relationship with our world. For much of humanity's ancient history, that number bounced wildly between 180 and 300. And so too did global temperatures.
Kaya po mas mainit na ngayon kapos dati.
It was a brutal and unpredictable world. At times, our ancestors existed only in tiny numbers. But just over 10,000 years ago, that number suddenly stabilized, and with it, Earth's climate. We found ourselves in an unusually benign period, with predictable seasons and reliable weather. For the first time, civilization was possible, and we wasted no time in taking advantage of that. Everything we've achieved in the last 10,000 years was enabled by the stability during this time. The global temperature has not wavered over this period by more than plus or minus 1 degree Celsius. Until now.
Yan po.
burning of fossil fuels, our destruction of nature, our approach to industry, construction and learning are releasing carbon into the atmosphere at an unprecedented pace and scale. We are already in trouble. The stability we all depend on is breaking. This story is one of inequality as well as instability. Today, those who've done the least to cause this problem are being the hardest hit. Ultimately, all of us will feel
Yung mga
the
maliliit na
impact,
isla po
some of
kagaya
which
natin.
are now unavoidable.
My world is melting.
You think you have control, we actually have no control.
I'm absolutely terrified to bring a child to this world.
Is this how our story is due to end? A tale of the smartest species doomed by that all-too-human characteristic of failing to see the bigger picture in pursuit of short-term goals. Perhaps the fact that the people most affected by climate change are no longer some imagined future generation, but young people alive today.
Tama.
Perhaps that will give us the impetus we need to rewrite our story, to turn this tragedy into a triumph. We are, after all, the greatest problem solvers to have ever existed on Earth. We now understand this problem. We know how to stop the number rising and put it in reverse. We must have carbon emissions, halt them this decade. We must recapture billions of tons of carbon from the air. We must fix our sights on keeping 1.5 degrees within reach. A new industrial revolution, powered by millions of sustainable innovations, is essential and is indeed already beginning. We will all share in the benefits: affordable clean energy, healthy air, and enough food to sustain us all. Nature is a key ally. Wherever we restore the wild, it will recapture carbon and help us bring back balance to our planet. And as we work to build a better world, we must acknowledge no nation has completed its development because no advanced nation is yet sustainable. All have a journey still to compete, so that all nations have a good standard of living and a modest footprint. We're going to have to learn together how to achieve this, ensuring none are left behind. We must use this opportunity to create a more equal world, and our motivation should not be fear, but hope.
Can we fix climate problem in one generation? My answer would be yes, we have to.
We need to not just to talk about what we can do, but to do what we can.
This is a challenge that we should try to solve in a quick way with a long-term vision.
It comes down to this: the people alive now are the generation to come. Will look at this conference and consider one thing: did that number stop rising and start to drop as a result of commitments made here? There's every reason to believe that the answer can be yes. If working apart, we are a force powerful enough to destabilize our planet, surely working together, we are powerful enough to save it. In my lifetime, I've witnessed a terrible decline. In yours, you could and should witness a wonderful recovery. That desperate hope, ladies and gentlemen, delegates, excellency, is why the world is looking to you and why you are here. Thank you.
Wow. Very powerful speech. Si Sir David Attenborough po, kung hindi ho niyo siya kilala, isa po siyang naturalist. Isa po siya sa mga siguro hindi na ho siya kino-consider na climate change activist kasi po siya well-respected person when it comes to the environment and climate change. Yan po ay isang importanteng tao. So, maaari niyo po sabihin sa akin, Matt, anong pakialam ko ba dyan? Ano ba ang pakialam ko sa climate change? Ang hirap nga mabuhay ngayon, may pandemic pa, wala akong trabaho, hindi ko alam saan ko kukunin ng pagkain, etc. Alam niyo po, lahat yan is important. Kung kayo po ay may anak, batang anak po ngayon, 2, 3, 4, 5 years old, malaki po ang possibility na magkakasakit po yan because of what's happening in the environment right now. If in our generation or their generation, bilang po mga bata, hindi ho magawa ng paraan ng climate change, lahat po yan maaari pong mawala. Maaari pong mamatay ang mundo natin in this generation if we are not able to do it. So ano ba ang rason kung bakit po napaka-importante ng climate change sa ating buhay? Panoorin po natin itong video na to. Ito po isang interview from ANC sa Associate Director ng Manila Observatory kung bakit po importante ang climate change sa ating mga Pilipino.
The COP26 summit is just a few days away. What should Filipinos expect from the conference? Let's now talk with Tony Lavinia, Associate Director for Climate Policy and International Relations of the Manila Observatory. Good afternoon, Professor Lavinia, and it's nice to have you on the show.
Good afternoon, Stanley. Good afternoon to your audience.
All right, the pandemic has put to the back seat a lot of the other initiatives, one of which, of course, is climate change. It turns out that we were all busy fighting COVID. The world missed its targets of reducing carbon emissions to bring temperatures down. Now, the Philippines is one of the most vulnerable countries when you talk about climate change. Why is it important for Filipinos to be worried and to care about this?
Climate change is a daily reality for the Philippines and for Filipinos. We have so many disasters that are climate related. We know the big storms. Every year we're hit by some of those big storms that cause loss and damage. And also we have droughts. Droughts are also very bad for us, have been a very bad experience for us. All of that is caused by climate change that's caused by human activities that we can actually stop, that we can actually regulate. So that's why we have to care for this, because it's getting worse and it will get worse. Stanley, we're talking about, for example, all of Manila, the city of Manila, and many other parts of Metro Manila going to be flooded, deluged, underwater 20, 30 years from now. Many of our islands will also be underwater. Many of our cities, coastal cities, will have to retreat. Our agriculture will change. Our food security will be severely affected. Public health will be affected. Lots more diseases because of climate that will happen. So this is not a joke, right. And we're running out of time.
Right, and all of those you mentioned should be loudly articulated to the body. How big a factor is the voice of our leader, our president, in terms of stressing to the world the urgency of addressing climate change issues? And has the Philippines been aggressive enough to push for this in the first place?
Historically, the Philippines has been a major player in conference of parties in climate change. I mean, we were a major player in the first. Our voice was definitely heard as a country that's affected by climate change. So under Fidel V. Ramos, both in 1995 in the first conference of the parties in Berlin, and then in Kyoto in 1997, we were the top, among the top 5-10 countries that were listened to about climate change. The same with Gloria Macapagal Arroyo in 2009 and Benigno Aquino in 2015. over the last few years, our voice wasn't as strong because President Duterte at the beginning, if you remember, was skeptical about the Paris Agreement and about international negotiations. But I think we're regaining our voice. The President is sending two of his most powerful and closest secretaries, Secretary Dominguez of Finance and Secretary Locsin of DFA to Glasgow. So that's a good sign because we do need to have our voice heard. It's a voice that should shout, and I think they will do that in Glasgow for climate justice because, this is about us being victims, suffering loss and damage. We contribute to it significantly in my view, but the major contributors of this are still the rich countries and big developing countries like China. So it's important that we look at this from an international point of view as a climate justice issue.
Yes, Professor Lavinia, I'll go back to your point that we contribute a bit to the problem. Global targets were missed by richer countries, but what about poorer ones like the Philippines? What have we actually done, and have we been doing our part in preparing for the impacts? How do you like the way the country is preparing for climate change?
Mixed. I think we're still very far behind. We are certainly not, have not been as aggressive in reducing our emissions. The fact that we added so many coal power plants in the last 20 years, it's a disaster for us. We contributed to our own death, to our own destruction when clearly there was options. The Renewable Energy Act in 2009 should have been religiously implemented by the Aquino government, and they did not. The Duterte government is better in that respect, but I think we still have to be more ambitious. Adaptation, we're a little more advanced than other countries because we paid attention to for example, zero casualty for typhoons. We've done a good job for that. I mean, in Germany, even in New York, a dozen people died because of floods. In our case, rarely now do people die. Meron pa rin namamatay, but people die, but not too many anymore compared to 2013 in when Yolanda hit us, right? Or Sendong in 2011. So we've improved in adaptation, but in mitigation, there's a lot of work we still have to do. We're not, as I always tell this to people because they always say we're a small emitter. We're not a small emitter with respect to the rest of the world. We're a small emitter with respect to the United States of America, to China, to Europe, to around 30 other countries. But we are a bigger emitter than 160 other countries. So we really have no moral ascendancy to say that we're not contributing because we're still the bigger contributor compared to 2/3 of the world.
All right, I'd like to talk about climate justice. Now, the high-level discussions on climate change expected to take center stage worldwide in the coming months, as more powerful nations are pressured to commit to do their part. Now, how should our leaders exact accountability from the world's biggest polluters in terms of climate justice? I mean, what do we ask for?
There are two areas there are two things we should ask for. One is climate finance. In other words, developed countries, and I would actually include China there as well because China is a developed country already, in my view. Developed countries should provide funding for us and for other developing countries so we can adapt to climate change and so we can reduce our emissions that contribute to climate change. Ang tawag niyan, climate finance. And in Glasgow, there's this demand to actually fulfill a promise which was made in 2009. I was there. I was a negotiator for the Philippines in 2009, and there was a promise made by Hillary Clinton on behalf of all developed countries. We will give you $100 billion a year on climate mitigation and adaptation. And that promise is not, by 2020, that promise was not kept last year. Okay, that's understandable because of the pandemic and there was no meeting. But this year, starting this year and every year after, that should be kept, $100 billion. The other thing we should ask for is the adoption and the implementation of the design, the adoption, the design, and the implementation of the loss and damage mechanism. In my view, the loss and damage mechanism is a liability compensation mechanism where we can actually ask rich countries to pay for loss of life and damage to property, infrastructure, etc. that's caused by climate change.
Kasi
Those
sila
are
yung
the
may
two asks for
kasalanan, di ba?
climate justice. There are
Pero kasama din
several
tayo dyan.
additional consequences of that. For example, on debt, most developing countries, they pay more debt than the climate assistance that they receive. That's not right. That's not fair, even for us, if you're still paying debt. I don't think we have that as much debt as we used to, but still, that is not right.
All right. As a parting shot, Professor Lavinia, we're going into national polls in a few months. Do you think this should be a major campaign issue that Filipinos should get their candidates to commit to?
Yes, correct.
Yes, I think this is a very important campaign issue for both the mitigation and adaptation. So we need our presidents to prioritize this. My experience, unfortunately, is presidents have not prioritized this kind of a very big issue, and they only pay attention to it when there is
a flood,
a disaster,
or a typhoon.
Yan mismo.
Yeah, or a typhoon. So they should prioritize it from the very beginning and make it central to their presidency, because it's like the pandemic. Everything that you do just collapses when a big environmental event like this happens. So same with climate change. A few big climate events in a year just destroys all your progress that year economically.
Oh, yeah.
All right. On that note, thanks a lot, Professor Tony Lavinia. Always nice to have you on the show.
Oh, ayun. So, just to end our special episode, you heard it from Professor Tony Lavinia ng Manila Observatory na kung napaka-importante po ng itong topic na to ma-discuss ng mga pamunuan ng Pilipino. No? I mean, our upcoming president, senators, congressmen, etc. Because this affects all of you, all of us out here, all of us here in the Philippines, because every year subjected po tayo sa climate change buwan-buwan. No? Meron po tayong ini-expect na mga bagyo at baha, etc. So, pasalamat tayo na hindi na marami na hong pamaraan ngayon, napaka-prepare na po tayo, hindi na tumataas ang mga numero ng mga namamatay. But that said, ang laki pa rin po ng pinsala sa ating mga pagkain, no? Yung mga nabahang pananim, mga bahay po na inanod, mga kagamitan, lahat po yan may value, even po yung mga simpleng mga bagay. Alam niyo po, last year when I came back from Canada, November 2020, first thing I did was to help people in Marikina, kasi po yung mga Marikina po, kung naalala niyo po yung mga taga Marikina dyan, binahan na naman po sila. Wala akong major na bagyo, hindi ko kamukha ng Haiyan dati o nung Yolanda, no? Pinag-usapan po dito ay simpleng matinding bagyo lang, na kung saan tumaas po ang Pasig River at marami pong napinsala, no? At may mga nasawi din diyan sa may Marikina. So, and a few months ago or a few weeks ago, wala po isang buwan, diyan naman po sa Northern Luzon, ganyan din po nangyari. So, napaka-importante po ng climate change sa ating buhay. At yan po ang gusto kong ihatid sa inyo ngayong special episode nitong Matt Montoya Live Today. At next Thursday po, sa Thursday, pag-uusapan po natin ulit. Tutuloy po natin itong topic na ito ng bahagya. At mapag-uusapan po natin yan. So for tonight, wala ho tayong programa. Ito na pong special episode natin. Babalik po ang ayuda ni Matt Montoya on Thursday. Pamimigay po tayo ng ayuda on Thursday. At babalik po on Thursday night at 8 p.m. ang ating programa. Okay? So yan po ang ating special episode for today. Marami pong salamat for joining me for this less than an hour program today. At gusto ko lang po sa inyo ihatid dyan, ibahagi sa inyo kung gaano po ka-importante ang United Nations Climate Change Conference na kasalukuyang nangyayari po ngayon sa Glasgow in the United Kingdom. So thank you so much for joining me on this special episode of Matt Montoya Live. I'm your host, Matt Montoya Ingson. I'll see you on Thursday, 8 p.m. dito po sa Lost Channel. Marami pong salamat sa ating partners, channel partners po for making this possible. Stoplight TV, Ride and Drive Philippines, Sweet Vibes, Sweet Message Vibes Group, Mobile Phone Good Vibes, G-Vibes Entertainment. Po lahat may vibes, no? At magkakaroon po tayo ng bagong channel partner next week. Welcome to the month of November. It is 2 months to go before the end of the year. At sana po maging parte po ng inyong buhay ang pag-aalam sa climate change because this affects all of us. Marami po salamat. Enjoy the rest of your day and please, I'll be back on Thursday. This program is brought to you by Sosmar Joseph Marikina Heights Branch. Masarap kahit walang manok. This program is brought to you by Sosmar Joseph Marikina Heights Branch. Masarap kahit walang manok.